I know I'm not going to see world peace in my lifetime, but I know I'm going to see major strides towards peace in the Middle East. Here in America, we've only been concerned with terrorism for about 14 years, give or take. 9/11 happened, and Muslims have passed ever since. That said, though this should go without saying, Muslims make up a relatively small minority of terrorists, and obviously very few Muslims are terrorists. Terrorism, actual terrorism, as in the use of violent crimes to achieve a political end, is something else entirely. That isn't going anywhere anytime soon. If it's not ISIS, then it's going to be someone else around the world. And here in America, it's probably going to be some far right white supremacy group or something along those lines. That said, foreign terrorist groups pose no real existential threat to the United States. But this is a pretty big but. Understanding what turns people to terrorism can help prevent it. But, you know, uh, terrorism abroad is a clustermuck of opposing opinions and jumbled information. It's always important to remember that some people consider our terrorists to be heroes and vice versa. And there's no easy way to say it, but America really needs to get out of the Middle East. ISIS is kind of our fault, and as messed up as just to say, we just kind of need to let the people of the Middle East handle it, which are more than capable of doing. Most people around the world are pissed off at America because we constantly get involved in situations we have no business in. And we really need to stop this. State-funded terrorism is a topic that gets pushed under the rug way more than it should. Between the Golden Dawn in Greece, the Burmese government killing journalists and activists, and Israel's human rights violation of the week, the world is full of terrorism committed by governments. Israel in particular is a bigger threat to world peace than ISIS ever will be. They used white phosphorus against Palestinian civilians in 2009. They tried flooding them earlier this year, and obviously there was the attack last year, and you know how they put up a big wall which has been deemed illegal by the Geneva Convention. And America is funding all this. They're funding the genocide of the Palestinian people, and they help Israeli nationals suppress foreigners. Uh, we need to stop funding them because they can take care of themselves, and our money is being wasted over there. Not that I want to put a monetary value on human life. Domestic terrorism is kind of a weird topic to cover, but it is coverable, so let's get covering. Terrorism in America has been pretty sparse compared to most of the world, even though there's a problem with categorizing it. Like, whether the Boston Marathon bombers or the Chapel Hill shootings were actual acts of terrorism or not. It depends widely on personal definition, even though there is a set definition of what terrorism is. But this isn't a matter of the why, this is how. And you hear the same thing from a lot of terrorists. They all feel isolated and ostracized. I mean, everyone feels like this from time to time. And when you take a step back and see how people treat Muslims or people with mental disorders or social pariahs in this country, of course they'd feel isolated. And if their isolation and disillusionment is bad enough, they can turn to extremes such as terrorism, however rare that may be. Another problem is the mainstream news. They make the Muslims out to be the bad guys, which of course is BS. For instance, the Boston Marathon bombers got like weeks of coverage, but the sociopathic little scrotum that shot the kids in Chapel Hill is barely talked about on like CNN and Fox. The mainstream news gives kind of a narrow-minded narrative that only certain types of people are terrorists, and terrorism is somehow the responsibility of Muslims. And there's of course the everyday interactions of bullying, belittling, various kinds of racism on the part of average folks. I mean, everyone's basically the same, but some people find it necessary to blackball people that they don't really understand, and that's just not cool. You know, people have the urge to belong to something, even if it is a group of criminals, and it should be looked at more as a tragedy when people turn to something like that. I guess the good part to all this is that domestic terrorism can be solved by everyday people. Basic things like just don't be a jerk to Muslim people. People with mental disorders or social priors, don't make them feel like outsiders. People who are outsiders or people who don't feel like they are part of something, to consider counseling, join a community group, finding an outlet for their anger. Of course, you avoid mainstream news. I mean, there's better ways to get news, like NPR, Al Jazeera. They're virtually biasless, and they don't incriminate an entire group of people all too often. And even something as simple as learning about other cultures and getting wise to the way things really are. I mean, no religion promotes violence, and going to war with an ideal isn't going to fix anything. Well, ISIS is losing more folks than they are gaining abroad, and more people are getting fed up with Israel and Myanmar and all those places in Greece. It's up to everyday people here to end domestic terrorism, or at least end the push factors that would drive people to terrorism.